Hi, I'm Elizabeth Hunter. I'm Assistant Professor of Theater Studies at San Francisco State University, and this presentation gives an overview of Bitter Wind, my adaptation of the Agamemnon mythos for three-dimensional holograms in augmented reality headsets like the HoloLens. Bitter Wind is my second project in an approach to scholarship wherein I create a digital adaptation of a canonical play and write an article that outlines the complementary theoretical and dramaturgical interventions. My previous project, Something Wicked, is a 2D side-scroller combat video game adaptation of the Norwegian invasion scene from William Shakespeare's Macbeth. And this is the second scene in the play, and it's essentially some monologues describing a battle the audience doesn't get to see. As I describe in the article, in staging the play, the scene is easy to overlook, but it's vital to understanding the play and Macbeth's character. So, Something Wicked explores what happens when the audience, the player, enacts this battle as Macbeth. And the Humanities Commons discussion forum for this talk has links to the game, which is a free download for Mac and PC, as well as the accompanying article, which is in International Journal of Performance Arts and Digital Media. So for that project and for Bitter Wind, I conceived of, wrote, designed, and directed the builds, recruiting and managing a cross-institutional team of programmers, artist animators, and game and sound designers to create the digital assets and code. And funding for the digital element of Bitter Wind that I'm talking about today came from the Siegel Design Cluster at Northwestern University and the Center for Interdisciplinary Research in the Arts. The complementary article is in progress, and I'll touch on its key points at the end of this presentation. I created Bitter Winds shortly after Microsoft's HoloLens headset came out, and I was very interested in the way augmented reality headsets or spatial computing, I know the terminology is still in flux, can turn your space into a 360-degree story environment that you can walk around in. Because this notion of pacing a familiar room taps into an element of a Greek mythos, the Agamemnon mythos, that, like the Norwegian invasion in Macbeth, has always struck me as too easy to overlook, but vital to the larger story. So the Agamemnon mythos is the one about the arrogant king of the Greek city-state Mycenae, a big hero of the Trojan War, who sails home from Troy and is immediately murdered by his wife in the bathtub. And she is furious because 10 years before, Agamemnon wanted the winds to pick up so that they can all sail to Troy, and so as a sacrifice to the gods, he slaughters his teenage daughter in front of all the sailors. So even for the ancient Greeks, this is a bit much. And Clytemnestra, the queen, who's his wife and the girl's mother, Clytemnestra was definitely not on board with this plan. And so as Agamemnon is sailing away, she immediately starts plotting his demise. And she sets up a relay system of fire beacons stretching from Troy to her house so that when Troy falls, someone there lights a beacon and a sentry a couple miles away who can see it lights his, and on until someone lights the beacon Clytemnestra's watchman can see from the palace, and she knows Agamemnon is sailing home. So that 10 years of slow burn waiting, pacing the halls, looking out the windows for her beacons to light, has always stuck out to me. And it gets lost in the retelling. 'Cause on the page, she paced for 10 years looking out the window. There's a few words. And staged versions, like Aeschylus's play Agamemnon, usually start with the last beacon lighting because all the stuff that happens when Agamemnon gets home is what's fun to watch on stage. But it's hard to sell tickets to actors' paces for a couple hours looking out the window. But I say these long, slow, quiet years of Clytemnestra's story are vital, and we can understand her better if we can participate in this part of her story, or at least a taste of it. And so to that end, I designed Bitter Wind to put users in Clytemnestra's literal point of view. So in contrast to Something Wicked, which is very much a game, Bitter Wind is more of an interactive, embodied, and time-based experience, where the object is to figure out your identity and the backstory of the larger Agamemnon mythos. So to evoke Clytemnestra's anxious waiting, I used the technology's spatial elements, because the headsets rely on spatial coordinates. You put it on, and it maps the space around you, and it locks holograms to the coordinates it's reading. And as a designer, that means I can set interactions to happen if the user moves to a specific spot in the room, or even if they turn their head in a certain direction. So as you'll see in the video clip I'm about to show, holograms of windows are all around the user, and sound cues like slamming windows and visual cues like hologram footprints tell the user where to stand. And get the user to pace back and forth from these hologram windows as a series of hologram torches lights outside those windows. So in addition to asking users to literally see Clytemnestra's perspective, I'm also using augmented reality to let them embody her anxious checking of the beacons from window to window and to feel the slow passage of time, because all the interactions you unlock in Bitter Wind are very slow. So I'll show a few clips of the view from inside the headset. And this you can see is the space that I designed it in. It's called the garage at Northwestern, but you can see that within the headset, you can see the environment around you. And here are some of the footprints guiding you over to the windows. And windows slam, causing you to look in that direction. You can reach out and put your hands through the holograms as they're happening.
You set. Troy has fallen.
Some more windows. Here's Iphigenia.
He returns. Hurry.
I'm doing the vocals because I was free.
He took
But I
me
love that
from
that
you.
person who just walked through the holograms can't see them. He doesn't know they're there. And these pieces, which I'll explain in a minute, unlock some more of the interactions. And the boat sails out and seems to sail right across
Open the door.
in front of you, which was my favorite interaction, I think. Oh, and there he is. Poor Agamemnon. Murdered in his own bathtub. So there's a tutorial at the beginning of the experience that explains that mechanic you just saw of using these 3D printed puzzle pieces that fit together in the shape of an amphora. And because the lens can recognize the pattern on each one of these shapes. And in between the other interactions that you're doing as an audience member or user, pacing back and forth and looking out the windows, you hold up each piece in front of the mural, just like you saw in the video. And it gradually fills in with images that are what Marianne Hoppmann would call the, quote, semiotic constants, end quote, of a particular mythos. And this mechanic is part of Bitter Wind's critical engagements, because my goal with this part of the design was to operationalize the, quote, semiotic approach to mythical names, end quote, that Hoppmann proposes as a method for distilling the constitutive semiotics of a specific mythical name from a given mythos' many variations. So for example, Hoppmann focuses on Scylla, the sea monster of Scylla and Charybdis, who she says has to have the, quote, conceptual domains, end quote, of dog, woman, and the sea to qualify as a portrayal of Scylla. So if someone unearths a pot and there's a painting of a sea monster that's clearly a woman, but there's no part of her that suggests dog, Hoppmann's model would say that that depiction is not a Scylla. So following this model, I designed Bitter Wind around the semiotic constants of the Agamemnon mythos, which appear in the experience as environmental holograms. The torches, tapestries, a bathtub, a net, a door, all around the user, and also as the images that fill in the mural. So importantly, as I did with Something Wicked, the experience of Bitter Wind does not explain the connections between these images and the backstory, because a key goal for both projects has been to inspire users to seek out the larger story and find the connections themselves. And in Bitter Wind, I'm using this absence of explicit connections in combination with a slow pace to cultivate mystery, which I'm intending to stand in for one of the more salient elements of ancient playgoing that we can never recapture, which is that playwrights in antiquity could rely on their audiences knowing the mythoi really well, having heard these stories since childhood, defining the daily fabric of their lives. And so again, from a dramaturgical point of view, an ancient audience's knowledge of the backstory would have driven a significant part of the dramatic tension in a staged retelling. And there is simply no way to recapture or replicate this dramatic tension that derives from an audience being culturally saturated in these stories. But mystery, or what Jacques Rancière in his Emancipated Spectator calls, quote, a more discrete affect, an affect of indeterminate effect. Curiosity, the desire to see closer up, end quote. Curiosity can build a very potent dramatic tension. So, to create the slow burn that drives Bitter Wind, I relied on the likelihood that a contemporary user will not know the details of the Agamemnon. And so instead of accessing that sense of intimacy and familiarity through knowledge of the backstory, I access it with the porousness of augmented reality, because the user's own space, like you saw, becomes the theatrical backdrop. And the holograms ghost that space, to borrow Marvin Carlson's metaphor of theatrical ghosting. Only augmented reality allows a user to see non-bodied entities, holograms, populating their own rooms that they know, hopefully, are not actual ghosts or hallucinations. They're more like a memory you can see and hear. And when an experience ends and you take the headset off, the memory of that hologram hovers in your space. So in the first HoloLens app I tried, RoboRaid, robot scorpions broke through my office wall. And after that, whenever I looked at that wall, all I could think of was those scorpions. So by nature, augmented reality adds this nuance of intimacy through personal space to whatever the subject is, robot scorpions or designing a car. But it was especially effective for emphasizing another nuance of Clytemnestra's story, in particular, that is easy to brush past. And that's that during those 10 years of checking out her window for the beacons, she's in her home, where her daughter grew up. So Clytemnestra is portrayed as enraged, as power-hungry, as lustful, and maybe she is some or all of those, but little is made of her sadness. So to suggest that Clytemnestra's sadness may be driving her actions just as much as rage and power-hungriness, I gave Bitter Wind a guide. The sad girl hologram, who, if a user is curious enough to go and read into the mythos, would realize must be Iphigenia, the daughter Agamemnon sacrificed. So the article I'm writing takes a closer look at this idea of semiotic constants and the dramaturgy of the play. Because in a typical staged production, the door dominates. Aeschylus sets his version of the mythos in front of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra's palace door. And as a set piece, Agamemnon's door is a tractor beam. All the energy of Aeschylus's plot, and consequently any staging drives towards the door. Because we know, if we're an audience in antiquity, the chorus knows, Clytemnestra knows, even Cassandra, who's also there, knows, obviously, she knows everything. And we all know that we all know, except for Agamemnon, who doesn't know, that when Clytemnestra gets him through that door, he's done. So, in Bitter Wind, by visualizing Iphigenia alongside the Agamemnon's more familiar semiotic constants, torches, tapestries, door, etc., and giving Iphigenia, not the door, the theatrical focus pullers of pointing to the next interaction trigger and having the only spoken lines in the experience, Bitter Wind suggests that Clytemnestra's memory of her daughter is as defining a conceptual domain in the larger Agamemnon mythos as is the door through which Agamemnon walks to his doom. So looking to the future of this technology, along with the familiar tensions of access and consent that humanists need to engage, I'm captivated by the idea that forever in our own environments, we'll begin to see around us the remnants of Greek tragedy, of robot scorpions, of whatever source was visualized there on our own tables, in our own spaces, and in which we participated. Thank you.